Section 1. The sprawling galaxy was home to countless civilizations, each with its own laws, customs, and technologies. Among them, the Eryxians stood unrivaled in their ingenuity, their technological marvels setting the standard for advanced societies. Their crowning achievement was the Crucible, a prison like no other, designed not to hold its captives but to break them utterly. The Crucible floated ominously in the void near a dying star, its exterior resembling a labyrinthine fortress constructed of shifting metal. Inside, it was said to bend reality itself, turning the fears and weaknesses of its prisoners against them. Escape was deemed impossible. Survival unlikely. Captain Evie Kane stared at the hollow screen displaying the Crucible, her expression somewhere between incredulous and amused. Her crew, a ragtag group of human misfits and specialists aboard the Eclipse runner, gathered around her. The mission briefing had been straightforward: infiltrate the prison, retrieve a high-value target, and get out alive. But the more they learned about the Crucible, the more absurd the task seemed. "So let me get this straight," said Tyrell, the ship's weapons specialist, leaning back in his chair. "This place doesn't just lock you up, it screws with your head? And your body," added Dr. Zara Lang, the team's medical officer, her tone clinical. "The Crucible's environment adapts to its prisoners, creating psychological and physical challenges tailored to their breaking point." Tyrell smirked, glancing at Evie. "Sounds like a fun vacation spot." Evie rolled her eyes. "Focus, people. The Crucible isn't just a prison, it's a fortress. No one's ever escaped, and only a few unlucky souls have ever been sent back out. Alive anyway." The team's target was a scientist named Dr. Victor Alaric, a genius in bioengineering who had been captured while working on a classified human research project. The Concord Alliance had betrayed him, handing him over to the Eryxians for reasons the crew wasn't privy to. All they knew was that Victor held the key to a breakthrough that humanity couldn't afford to lose. "Why didn't they just kill him?" asked Jules, the ship's engineer, adjusting his visor as he examined the schematics of the Crucible. "Because," Zara replied, her voice tinged with dark humor, "the Eryxians like their prisoners broken, not dead. It's a warning to anyone who crosses them." Evie stood, her commanding presence silencing the chatter. "We're not just crossing them. We're walking straight into their house, kicking down the door, and taking back what's ours. If you're not ready for that, now's the time to back out." Silence fell over the crew as they exchanged glances. None of them moved. They had faced impossible odds before, and every time, humanity's reputation as stubborn, unpredictable survivors had seen them through. "I'm in," Tyrell said with a grin. "Let's show these aliens what humans are made of." The rest of the crew voiced their agreement, and Evie nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Good. Lyra, bring up the infiltration plan." The ship's AI, Lyra, projected a hologram of the Crucible, its layers of security rotating in a dizzying display. "The Crucible's defense systems are extensive," Lyra explained, her tone precise. "External sensors, automated drones, and a multi-layered energy shield. Once inside, the prison's adaptive systems will analyze and target each of you." "Fantastic," Tyrell muttered. "So we're walking into a death trap." "Not quite," Lyra countered. "The Crucible wasn't designed for humans. Its programming will adapt, but it may struggle to predict your actions." Evie smirked. "We're about to find out just how unpredictable we can be." The infiltration plan relied on the Eclipse runner's cloaking systems to approach undetected. From there, the crew would use a combination of hacking, brute force, and ingenuity to breach the prison's defenses. It wasn't the most elegant plan, but elegance wasn't their style. As the ship slipped through the Crucible's perimeter, the crew prepared for the mission. Zara handed out neurodampeners to protect against the prison's psychological attacks, while Jules fine-tuned the breaching charges. Tyrell checked and rechecked his arsenal, his grin widening with every new weapon he added to his gear. "Remember," Evie said as the shuttle detached from the Eclipse runner, "we go in, get Victor, and get out. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it." The shuttle docked with a maintenance hatch on the Crucible's underbelly. As the crew disembarked, The air was immediately heavy with an oppressive energy that made their skin crawl. The corridors were dark and winding, the walls seemingly alive with shifting patterns of light. "This place is creepy," Tyrell muttered, his usual bravado faltering. "It's designed to unsettle you," Zara replied, scanning the area with her medical device. "Don't let it." They pressed forward, following Lyra's guidance through the labyrinthine passages. The deeper they went, the more the crucible seemed to react to their presence. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, whispers, footsteps that didn't belong to them. The neural dampeners dulled the worst of it, but the tension was palpable. The first obstacle came in the form of a massive energy barrier blocking their path. Jules crouched beside it, his visor glowing as he analyzed the shield's frequency. "Give me a minute," he said, pulling out a series of tools. "This thing's using some kind of adaptive algorithm. Clever, but not clever enough." "Work faster," Evie urged, her eyes scanning the corridor. The shadows seemed to move, and the whispers grew louder. She gripped her weapon tightly, her instincts screaming that they weren't alone. Suddenly, the wall behind them shifted, and a humanoid figure emerged, its body composed of swirling energy. It moved with unnatural speed, its glowing eyes fixed on the crew. "Contact!" Evie shouted, opening fire. The creature darted forward, dodging the shots with fluid precision. Tyrell stepped up, launching a grenade that exploded in a flash of light and sound. The creature recoiled, its form flickering before it dissolved into the wall. "What the hell was that?" Tyrell asked, his voice tight. "The Crucible's defense systems," Zara replied, her face pale. "It's manifesting constructs to stop us." "Jules, how's that barrier?" Evie demanded. "Almost got it," Jules exclaimed as the energy shield flickered and vanished. "Let's move!" They pressed onward, the Crucible's constructs pursuing them at every turn. The crew fought with relentless determination, their human adaptability and sheer stubbornness proving to be their greatest assets. Yet with every step, the Crucible seemed to learn, its attacks growing more coordinated and ferocious. As they reached the cell block where Victor was being held, Evie knew the real challenge was only just beginning. The Crucible wasn't just a prison, it was a living nightmare. And it was just getting started. Section 2. The crew of the Eclipse Runner stood outside the reinforced cell block, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they regrouped. The Crucible was alive, adapting to their every move, and the oppressive weight of its presence was beginning to wear on them. Captain Evie Asher glanced back down the corridor, now eerily silent after their last skirmish with the shifting constructs. "We're not alone," Tyrell muttered, reloading his plasma rifle. "Feels like this place is watching us." "It is," Syra said, her scanner flickering in her hands. "The energy readings are spiking again. It's learning. Adapting." "Let it," Evie said, her voice calm but commanding. "We adapt faster." The cell block door loomed ahead, a massive slab of metal etched with glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. Jules crouched beside the door's control panel, his visor glowing faintly as he studied the mechanisms. "This isn't your average lock," he said, pulling out his toolkit. "The entire thing is tied to the Crucible's central systems. If I force it, we could trigger." A low hum echoed through the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. The walls shimmered as tendrils of energy snaked out, crawling toward the team. "We don't have time for subtlety," Zara said, drawing her plasma blade. "Do your thing, Jules." Jules nodded, his fingers flying over the control panel. Sparks flew as he bypassed circuits, his muttered curses barely audible over the growing hum. "Almost there, just a little more." The tendrils lashed out, one striking Tyrell's shoulder and sending him sprawling. Zara stepped in, slicing the energy construct with a sharp arc of her blade, but the tendrils reformed almost instantly. "Hurry!" Evie shouted, firing at the approaching constructs. The energy dissipated briefly but returned with renewed intensity. With a triumphant grin, Jules twisted a final wire, and the massive door hissed open. "Got it! Let's move!" The team rushed inside, the door slamming shut behind them. The cell block was unlike anything they'd expected. Instead of rows of cells, the chamber was a vast, circular space filled with floating platforms and shimmering energy fields. Each platform held a single occupant, suspended in stasis. At the center of the room was a towering column of light, its base encased in a web of conduits. "This is different," Syra said, her voice tinged with awe. "The prisoners aren't just confined. They're integrated." Evie's jaw tightened. "Then let's unintegrate our guy. Where's Victor?" Syra scanned the room, her device pinging as it locked onto a platform near the top of the chamber. "There. Platform 17. Of course it's the hardest one to reach," Tyrell muttered, wincing as Zara patched up his shoulder. Jules examined the room's mechanisms, his visor glowing as he analyzed the energy flows. "The platforms are linked to the central column. If we can access the control system, we can bring it down. And let the Crucible know exactly where we are," Zara pointed out. "Like it doesn't already," Evie said. "Jules, get to work. Tyrell, Zara, cover him. Syra, you're with me." The team split up, Evie and Syra moving toward the towering column while the others held the line against the Crucible's constructs. The air around the column shimmered with heat, and the hum of energy grew deafening as they approached. "This thing's a conduit," Syra said, her eyes scanning the glowing mass of energy. "It's not just powering the platforms, it's feeding off them." Evie raised an eyebrow. "Feeding?" Syra nodded grimly. "The prisoners aren't just being held. Their neural patterns are being harvested. The Crucible is learning from them." "Well, it's about to lose its star pupil," Evie said, leveling her weapon at the column. "What do we hit?" Syra pointed to a cluster of conduits near the base. "Those. But it'll trigger a failsafe." "Of course it will," Evie muttered. "Let's do it." As Evie fired on the conduits, the entire room shook violently. The platforms shuddered, and the energy fields flickered. The Crucible responded instantly, its constructs swarming into the chamber with renewed ferocity. "Hostiles incoming!" Zara shouted, her plasma blade carving through a construct. "We're getting overwhelmed here." "Hold them off!" Evie called back. "We're almost there." Syra worked frantically at the control panel near the column, her fingers flying over the interface. "I'm unlocking the platform, but the Crucible's fighting me every step of the way." "Hurry up, Doc!" Tyrell shouted, firing into the mass of constructs. "We're running out of ammo and patience." Finally, the platform holding Victor descended, its energy field dissipating. The man within was gaunt and pale, his eyes fluttering open as the stasis released him. He looked at Evie with a mix of confusion and relief. "You're human?" he rasped. "Last I checked," Evie replied, helping him to his feet. "Time to go, document." As the team regrouped, the Crucible's fury intensified. The walls seemed to close in, the constructs multiplying faster than they could destroy them. The hum of energy became a deafening roar, and the chamber's temperature began to rise. "The Crucible's destabilizing," Syra warned. "If we don't move now, we're not getting out." The team fought their way back to the cell block door, their movements desperate but coordinated. Jules reactivated the controls, and the doors slid open just as the chamber began to collapse. The team rushed through, dragging Victor with them as the Crucible's fury followed. Back in the corridor, the team sprinted toward their extraction point, the ship's shuttle waiting just beyond. The Crucible's constructs surged after them, the prison refusing to let its prey escape so easily. "We're not gonna make it!" Tyrell shouted, firing behind him as he ran. "We're making it!" Evie snapped. "Move!" The team reached the shuttle, and Zara slammed the hatch shut just as the constructs clawed at the edges. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and they blasted away from the Crucible, leaving the collapsing chamber in their wake. Victor slumped into a seat, his breath ragged. You came for me." "Wouldn't have missed it," Evie said, a faint smirk on her lips. "Hang on. This ride's about to get bumpy." As the shuttle reconnected with the Eclipse runner, the Crucible loomed behind them, its structure shuddering as it struggled to repair itself. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Section 3. The Eclipse runner streaked away from the Crucible, the ship's engines burning white-hot as the crew settled into the tense quiet that followed their daring escape. The prison loomed behind them, battered but still intact, its ominous glow a reminder that their mission was far from over. On the bridge, Commander Evie Asher paced, her sharp gaze fixed on the holoscreen displaying the Crucible's energy readings. Despite their best efforts, the structure's adaptive systems were regenerating at an alarming rate. They had freed Victor, but the prison remained alive and angry. "Status update, Jules," Evie barked. The engineer adjusted his visor, his fingers flying over the console. "The Crucible's systems are reinitializing. It's patching the breaches we made and recalibrating its energy output." "How long until it's fully operational again?" Evie asked. Jules hesitated. "At this rate? Maybe an hour." Victor, seated nearby and still pale from his ordeal, leaned forward. "You don't understand. The Crucible isn't just a prison, it's a weapon. If it recovers, it'll retaliate." Tyrell scoffed from his station. "A prison is gonna fight back? What's it gonna do, throw us in time out?" Victor's expression darkened. "It doesn't need to. The Crucible is designed to learn from its prisoners, to adapt to their weaknesses. You've already given it a taste of humanity's capabilities. If it gets another chance, it'll be ready for you." Evie slammed her hand on the console, drawing everyone's attention. "Then we don't give it another chance. Syra, can we destroy it for good?" Syra frowned, scanning the data streaming across her display. "The Crucible's power core is buried deep within its structure. We need to overload it, but its energy shielding is nearly impenetrable." Jules chimed in. "We'd also need to keep it from repairing itself while we work. Its adaptive systems are faster than anything we've dealt with before." Victor shook his head. "You don't have to destroy it. You just need to destabilize the core. Without it, the Crucible's systems will collapse under their own weight." "And how do we do that?" Zara asked, leaning against the bulkhead. Victor's gaze hardened. "You take the fight inside." Again. The team groaned in unison, but Evie's resolve remained firm. "If that's what it takes, we'll do it. Lyra, prepare a tactical analysis of the Crucible's core. Tyro, get the heavy ordnance ready." Tyro grinned. "Now you're speaking my language." Syra glanced at Victor. "You're sure about this? We barely made it out last time." Victor nodded. "The Crucible's strength is also its weakness. It relies on precision and control. Disrupt that, and it crumbles." Evie addressed the crew, her voice steady but firm. "We've faced worse odds before. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it through this." The Eclipse runner turned back toward the Crucible, its engines roaring as the ship approached the massive structure once more. The team suited up in the cargo bay, their faces grim but determined. Victor joined them, his pale features set with resolve. "You're coming with us?" Zara asked, raising an eyebrow. Victor nodded. "I know the Crucible systems better than anyone. You'll need me to navigate the core." Tyrell chuckled. "Well, at least you're not just dead weight." As the shuttle detached, the crew braced themselves. The Crucible seemed to sense their return, its outer defenses activating with a ferocity they hadn't seen before. Drones swarmed toward the shuttle, energy beams streaking through the void. "Hold on!" Kellen shouted from the cockpit, weaving the shuttle through the onslaught. Explosions rocked the craft as drones exploded around them, their debris scattering like fireworks. "Shields at 50%! Lyra warned through the comms. "Just get us to the drop point!" Evie yelled, gripping her seat. The shuttle veered sharply, dodging a massive energy blast before skimming the Crucible's surface. The team leapt out as the craft hovered over a maintenance platform, the ship retreating as soon as they hit the ground. "We're in," Evie said, her voice crackling through the comms. "Lyra, keep the shuttle ready for extraction." The Crucible's interior was more chaotic than before, its walls shifting and pulsing with energy. The team moved quickly, Victor leading them through the labyrinthine corridors. "The core is heavily shielded," Victor explained. But there's a control node nearby. If we overload it, the chain reaction will destabilize the entire structure. Sounds easy enough, Tyrell said sarcastically, blasting a drone that darted toward them. The team reached the control node, a massive console surrounded by glowing conduits. Syra immediately got to work, her hands flying over the controls. "The Crucible's fighting me," she said through gritted teeth. "It's like it knows what we're doing." The walls around them shimmered, and the constructs began to emerge again. Sleek, insect-like machines with glowing eyes crawled out of the shadows, their movements unnervingly precise. "Here we go again," Zara muttered, igniting her plasma blade. The corridor erupted into chaos as the team fought off the constructs, their weapons blazing. Tyrell launched a grenade that exploded in a flash of light, buying them a moment of reprieve. "Syra, hurry up!" Evie called, taking down another drone with a precise shot. "Almost there," Syra replied, sweat beading on her forehead. The control node flickered, and Syra hit a final key. "Done! The overload sequence is starting." The conduits crackled with energy, and the entire chamber shook violently. The team sprinted toward the exit, the constructs closing in behind them. "We need to move faster!" Tyrell shouted, firing over his shoulder. The team reached the extraction point just as the Crucible's core began to destabilize. The shuttle swooped in, and they clambered aboard, the ship pulling away at full speed. From the safety of the Eclipse runner, the crew watched as the Crucible imploded, its massive structure collapsing in on itself. The once mighty prison was reduced to a cloud of debris, its energy signature extinguished. Victor slumped in his seat, a faint smile on his lips. "It's over." Evie nodded, her gaze fixed on the holoscreen. "For now." The crew exchanged tired but triumphant looks. They had turned the galaxy's perfect prison into its own undoing, and proved, once again, that humanity was not to be underestimated. Section 4. The remnants of the Crucible drifted silently in the void, a scattered graveyard of twisted metal and fading energy. On the Eclipse runner, the crew watched the debris field with a mixture of relief and lingering unease. They had done the impossible, twice, and yet a sense of unfinished business hung in the air. Captain Evie Asher stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the holoscreen displaying the wreckage. The crew buzzed around her, performing checks and celebrating in hushed tones. But something gnawed at her, a feeling that their victory might be short-lived. "Captain," Lyra's voice chimed in softly. "All systems are operational. We are clear to set a course away from the sector." Evie nodded absently. "Good work, Lyra." She turned to face her crew. "Everyone, debrief in 1 hour. For now, get some rest." As the crew dispersed, Victor approached her, his expression thoughtful. "You seem troubled," he observed. Evie glanced at him, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Just processing. We destroyed the galaxy's most formidable prison, and yet I can't shake the feeling that we've kicked a hornet's nest." Victor leaned against the console, his gaze distant. "The Eryxians won't take this lightly. The Crucible was more than a prison, it was a symbol of their dominance." "Let them come," Tyrell interjected, stepping onto the bridge. "We've shown we can handle whatever they throw at us." Evie raised an eyebrow. "Confident as ever, Tyrell?" He grinned. "Just stating facts, Captain." Zara joined them, her demeanor uncharacteristically serious. "Captain, incoming transmission." "It's from the Eryxians." Evie's eyes narrowed. "Put it through." The holoscreen flickered before displaying an imposing Arysian figure, its silver skin and glowing eyes radiating authority. Its voice was cold and resonant. "Humans, you have committed an act of war. The destruction of the Crucible cannot go unanswered." Evie met the alien's gaze unflinchingly. "We acted to protect our own. The Crucible was a threat to all free beings." The Eryxian's eyes flashed. "You misunderstand. The Crucible was not merely a prison, it was a keystone. Its destruction has set events in motion that even we cannot control." Victor's face paled. "A keystone? Of what?" The Arysian continued. "The Crucible contained more than prisoners. It held back an ancient force, one that now stirs. You have unleashed the maelstrom. A heavy silence settled over the bridge. Evie exchanged a glance with Syra, who was rapidly scanning the data. Captain, Syra whispered urgently. I'm detecting energy fluctuations in the surrounding space. Something is definitely happening. Evie turned back to the Arisian. If that's true, help us stop it. The alien's expression remained unreadable. You have sealed your fate. We will not aid you. The transmission cut abruptly. Tyrell cursed under his breath. Typical. Cyrus' console beeped loudly. Captain, energy readings are spiking. A massive anomaly is forming where the crucible was. On the holoscreen, a swirling vortex of energy began to coalesce amidst the debris. Tendrils of dark matter spiraled outward, and space itself seemed to warp around it. Victor's voice was barely above a whisper. The maelstrom. It's real. Evie took a deep breath, her mind racing. Options, people. Jules tapped furiously on his console. We could try to outrun it, but the energy field is expanding rapidly. At this rate, it'll overtake us in minutes. Cyrus' eyes widened as she analyzed the data. It's not just an anomaly. It's a dimensional rift. If it continues to grow, it could consume this entire sector. Zara tightened her grip on her plasma blade. Can we shut it down? Victor stepped forward. The maelstrom feeds on energy. If we could invert its polarity, we might be able to collapse it. Tyrell raised an eyebrow. And how do we do that? Victor met Evie's gaze. We need to generate a massive energy pulse, something powerful enough to overload the maelstrom's core. Evie considered the plan. What about the ship's reactor? Jules shook his head. Not enough output. We need something exponentially more powerful. Cyrus' eyes lit up. The crucible's remnants. The debris still contains residual energy. If we can harness it, amplify it through the ship's systems. Jules caught on. We could create a feedback loop, directing the energy back into the maelstrom. Evie nodded decisively. Let's do it. Jules, Syra, coordinate the energy transfer. Tyrell, Zara, prep the ship's defenses in case we attract unwanted attention. As the crew sprang into action, Evie couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They were facing the unknown yet again, and no one hesitated. Minutes later, the ship maneuvered closer to the swirling vortex, the debris field shimmering with residual energy. Jules and Syra worked feverishly, calibrating the ship's systems to absorb and redirect the energy. Ready to initiate the transfer, Syra announced, sweat beading on her forehead. Do it, Evie ordered. The ship's hull vibrated as the energy flowed in, the lights flickering momentarily. Alarms blared, but the crew held steady. Energy levels approaching critical, Lyra warned. Steady, Jules muttered, his hands flying over the controls. The maelstrom's tendrils reached toward the ship, as if sensing their intent. The void around them darkened, the stars themselves seeming to fade. Now! Victor shouted. Syra activated the energy pulse, and a beam of blinding light shot from the ship directly into the heart of the maelstrom. The vortex convulsed, its spiraling mass destabilizing. Energy feedback is increasing exponentially, Jules yelled. We need to pull back. Not yet, Evie insisted. We have to make sure it's working. The maelstrom began to collapse inward, the tendrils retracting as the vortex shrank. A shockwave rippled outward, rocking the Eclipse runner violently. Brace for impact! Evie shouted, gripping the console. The ship lurched, systems flickering as the shockwave passed over them. Then, just as suddenly, the turbulence ceased. Silence enveloped the bridge. The maelstrom was gone, leaving nothing but the quiet expanse of space. Syra checked her readings, a smile breaking across her face. It's over. The rift is closed. The crew erupted into cheers, relief washing over them. Tyrell clapped Victor on the back. Not bad for a guy we had to rescue from prison. Victor chuckled, the tension easing from his features. Glad to be of use? Evie allowed herself a rare moment of levity. Excellent work, everyone. Once again, we turned a no-win scenario into a victory. Zara smirked. Think the Eryxians will send us a thank you note? Unlikely, Evie replied wryly. But maybe they'll think twice before underestimating us again. Jules stretched, his eyes twinkling. You know, we just saved an entire sector from imploding. That's got to earn us some points with someone. Syra nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps it's time humanity took a more proactive role in the galactic community. We've proven we can handle ourselves. Victor's expression grew serious. There's truth in that. The galaxy is changing, and not all civilizations are prepared for what's coming. We could make a difference. Evie looked around at her crew, their resilience, their camaraderie, and felt a swell of pride. Then let's be that difference. We've shown that ingenuity and courage can overcome even the most insurmountable challenges. Tyro raised an imaginary glass. To making playgrounds out of prisons. The crew laughed, the tension of the past hours finally giving way to relief. Set a course for home, Lyra, Evie commanded. I think we've earned a little downtime. As you wish, Captain, the AI responded warmly. As the Eclipse runner moved away from the now quiet sector, Evie reflected on the journey. They had faced the galaxy's deadliest prison, outsmarted a technologically superior species, and closed a rift that threatened to consume them all. But more than that, they had proven something, to the Eryxians, to the galaxy, and perhaps most importantly, to themselves. Captain, Lyra's voice interrupted her thoughts. Incoming message from the Galactic Council. Evie raised an eyebrow. On screen. A dignified figure appeared, their features a blend of several species, a representative of the diverse council. Captain Evie Asher, your actions have not gone unnoticed. The council wishes to extend its gratitude for your decisive intervention. Evie exchanged a surprised glance with Syra. Thank you. We did what we had to do. Indeed. The containment of the maelstrom prevented a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. We would like to invite you and your crew to participate in a summit to discuss future collaborations. Tyro grinned. Looks like we're moving up in the world. Evie nodded thoughtfully. We'd be honored. Send us the details. As the transmission ended, the crew buzzed with excitement. Imagine that, Zara mused. From outlaws to ambassadors. Victor smiled. Perhaps this was meant to be. A turning point for humanity's role in the galaxy. Evie felt a sense of fulfillment settle over her. Whatever comes next, I know we can handle it. Together. The crew dispersed to their stations, the atmosphere aboard the Eclipse runner lighter than it had been in days. As the stars stretched out before them, Evie allowed herself a moment of quiet contentment. They had turned the galaxy's perfect prison into a playground, and in doing so, carved out a place for humanity among the stars. Lyra, she said softly. Let's see what adventures await us next. Course laid in, Captain, the AI replied. The galaxy is ours to explore. Evie smiled. Then let's not keep it waiting.